I quit being a serial killer because of a terrifying experience involving a cat in a tree. I used to be a screenwriter. Well, I suppose I still am technically, but I don't write anymore. I can't. It's been a year since I dropped everything and walked away from that project, and I haven't touched a script since. The show, The Killer's Shadow. It was supposed to be a breakthrough. A high-concept, dark drama. At first, the ideas were exciting. The potential endless. But then, everything changed. I was halfway through a rewrite for the pilot episode when it happened. I can't bring myself to say what, not yet. Not until I'm sure. But what I saw, what I felt. I can still hear it sometimes in the silence. Now I'm back to searching for work, pretending things are normal. But it's hard to ignore the weight of the trauma, the nightmare that follows me, and the nagging feeling that I didn't just leave the show behind. Something followed me out. I used to relish every moment of it. You know, being a serial killer, it was in my veins like I was born for it. It was cutting edge, the way I'd craft each kill, shaping my own signature with precision. Some people collect stamps, others hoard antiques. Me? I collected lives. And I was damn good at it. I didn't just slaughter, I created. Each victim, carefully selected, was a canvas waiting for my bloody brushstrokes. I was ruthless, sure, but that was the point. There was a rhythm, a flow to it. Like a perfectly composed symphony of terror, where every note had to be hit just right. The chase with the detectives? Delicious. It wasn't just about the killing anymore. It was the game, the back and forth, the thrill of watching them think they had me cornered, only for me to slip away like a shadow. And when they thought they understood my pattern, when they thought they were one step ahead, I'd throw in a twist, keep them on their toes. It was a real killer instinct. You can't really call it a hobby though, can you? It's more than that. It was my craft. The way I meticulously planned every slice, every cut of the knife, it wasn't just murder, it was art. And as for the gore? Well, I didn't just spill it, I painted with it. Each drop, each splash, it was part of the masterpiece. The Killer's Shadow wasn't just what I did. It wasn't just another writing gig I had become completely immersed in and obsessed with. It was who I was. Behind the scenes of The Killer's Shadow, it wasn't the creative process that consumed me, it was the grind. The endless grind. Hours spent brainstorming, writing, rewriting, refining. It was all for nothing, really. At least that's how it felt. The pay barely covered rent, let alone the therapy sessions I was already starting to need. But of course no one cared. Being a writer on a show was nothing more than a joke to the showrunners, who spent more time puffing up their egos than actually considering what went into making the thing. You were just a cog in the machine, your ideas ground down into dust by the relentless, soulless demands of the industry. Every meeting was an exercise in humiliation. They'd ignore everything I said, dismiss my suggestions without a second thought, while fawning over some intern who couldn't even spell serial killer correctly, let alone understand the depths of a character's motivations. Meanwhile, I was stuck fixing dialogue for characters who were barely more than caricatures of the twisted art I wanted to create. But the worst part? The title. The one thing I had fought to keep authentic. The Killer's Shadow was my vision, raw and unapologetic. But they hated it. The execs, the showrunners, the suits, whatever you want to call them, they couldn't care less about the soul of the show. No, they wanted something marketable. Something more mainstream. And so, it was changed. Living with a Ghost. What a joke. A stupid, sanitized version of what was supposed to be a gritty, psychological horror series about a man who lived with the blood on his hands every day, suffocating under the weight of his own darkness. Instead, they wanted light-hearted moments. Maybe the protagonist would even have a kid. Or a pet cat. A cat. I should have seen the writing on the wall then. The shadow hanging over everything, thick and cold. The producers wanted a cat. A cat. The whole damn world felt like it was against me, but none more so than this cat. Ms. Whiskers, as they called her. Or Mittens in the script, whatever the hell that meant. I had a creeping suspicion that her name was the least of my problems. Animal handlers were rushing past me, their faces flushed with urgency. They were frantic, searching high and low, whispering her name, but all I could hear in the background was the dull hum of the coffee maker as I neared the break room and my own bitter thoughts. I should have let it go, but I couldn't. I was in the break room, staring at the coffee machine, trying to ignore the growing weight in my chest. I ordered my coffee, pumpkin spice latte of course, and stood there, feeling the heat of the machine, the sound of the steam pressing against my skull. Focus, I told myself. Focus on anything but the cat. That's when I saw it. The tail. No one else was around and the place felt oddly still. In a moment of sheer stupidity, I reached out and lifted the tablecloth. Just to get a glimpse. just to see if I could finally put an end to this stupid, persistent feeling of tension the cat had caused. I didn't mean to do it. Really, I didn't. But something in me snapped, something deep in the pit of my stomach. I lifted the cloth and there she was. Her wide, glossy eyes fixed on mine, a flash of fear darting across her face. I swear I didn't mean to scare her. But when she bolted, when she shot out from under the table like a bolt of lightning, my gut twisted. I had made her do that. She ran straight for the window. My heart raced as she leapt up onto the sill, and in that single, terrifying moment, I could only watch in horror as she launched herself into the air. My breath caught. I'd startled her so badly I thought I'd killed her. I was sick to my stomach, my mind spinning as I rushed to the window. My hands trembled as I looked down, expecting to see a lifeless, mangled body sprawled out below. But instead, the coffee burned my chest as I spilled it, the sudden pain of the hot liquid shocking me into a harsh, involuntary yell. And then I heard her. The cat's cry, a sharp, panicked meow. She hadn't hit the ground. She'd landed on a 12-foot oak branch and now she was stuck, too scared to move. For a brief moment, I stood frozen there, chest searing with pain, the burning of the coffee mingling with the crushing weight of guilt. And yet, it was almost like something else was taking over. A strange, protective feeling rose inside me, a deep urge to make things right, to save her. Without thinking, I pushed the window open further, the cool air rushing in. My head spun with confusion, guilt, and fear, but none of it stopped me. I crawled out onto the windowsill, ignoring the stinging heat on my chest, and reached for the branch. My hand shook, but I climbed out further, inching closer to where she was stuck. The tree was low enough for me to reach, but she seemed so helpless, so fragile. I could hear her cries, soft and terrified. And it was then, as my fingertips brushed the bark, that I realized something. I was trying to save a cat, after everything I had done. Maybe I wasn't the villain in this story after all. I had to get her down. I was almost there. The burning in my chest, the searing pain from the coffee spill, was fading now, replaced by something colder, something more urgent. Ms. Whiskers was perched on the branch, her eyes fixed on me. Her fur looked strange in the moonlight, darker, almost oily. She didn't move when I crawled closer, not an inch. Her eyes never left me, as if she were waiting. I stretched out my hand, trembling, heart hammering in my chest. I had to help her. I couldn't leave her here, stuck on this branch. But as my fingers brushed her fur, something was wrong. It wasn't the softness I expected. No, this was slick, too slick. Cold like rubber. My skin crawled. I pulled my hand back, but before I could react, I heard it. The meow. But it wasn't right. The sound was off, too high-pitched, distorted. Like it was coming from the wrong throat, the wrong creature. And then, before I could even make sense of it, she made a sound that didn't belong. A shriek. It wasn't a meow. It wasn't anything I'd ever heard from a cat. It was a jagged, bone-shaking wail that vibrated deep in my chest. My vision blurred with the sound, the world around me trembling. And that's when it happened. The fur split open. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't a slow transformation. One moment she was a cat. The next she was ripping open like a cheap costume. A seam ran down her back, a line of darkness, and then she split apart. I froze. My hand was still stuck in the mess, sinking deeper into the writhing thing that wasn't a cat. It was worse than any nightmare. Beneath the fur, beneath the mask of normality, was something wrong. It was like spaghetti. No worse. Like spaghetti and meatballs if they were made of maggots and gore. A wet, glistening mass of wriggling, slimy tendrils. It oozed and squirmed, pulsing with unnatural life. The texture was all wrong, slick and sticky under my fingers like I was touching something alive but not alive, something that should not exist. I tried to pull my hand back. I wanted to pull away, but it was as if my fingers were glued to it, sucked into the mass of writhing filth. And then, it shrieked again. Not a meow, not a scream. This was a scream. A wail that vibrated through my skull, rattling my brain, clawing into my mind. The thing inside her was alive, something alien, something wrong. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My vision blurred. The tree tilted. The world around me cracked, splintering, breaking into pieces. I felt myself falling. It wasn't slow. It wasn't graceful. I plummeted, the ground rushing up at me in a terrifying blur. My limbs flailed, my chest tight from the burning pain, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. My screams mixed with the thing's wails. And then crash. When I woke, I was in Pinecrest Medical Center. It was so quiet. Too quiet. The white walls, the sterile air, it all felt wrong. My body ached, but there was a strange detachment as if I wasn't fully present in it. It was like waking up from a nightmare, but instead of relief I felt empty. I blinked, confused. The room was too clean, too peaceful. I didn't know how I got here. My chest was still burning from the coffee, but it didn't feel like it was mine anymore. My head spun. And then it hit me. The tree. That thing. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. I bolted upright, panic flooding me. The memory of what I had touched, what I had felt, slammed into me like a freight train. My stomach lurched. I screamed. It came out of me raw, desperate, the sound scratching at my throat. I tried to stand, but my limbs weren't cooperating. My arms were weak, my body unsteady. I thrashed in the bed, the sheets tangling around my legs as the terror surged through me. Get off me! I screamed, my voice shaking. I can't. The door swung open. 2 men stepped inside, their faces blank, expressionless. One of them was the producer, Darren, the other was a lawyer, Mr. Hartman. They didn't seem surprised to see me like this. Not the way I was, thrashing in panic. They didn't even blink. Are you okay? Darren asked, his voice flat, like he was reading from a script. Mr. Hartman didn't even look at me, his eyes glued to his clipboard. We need to know when you'll be able to finish the script. Or if we need to replace you. Replace me? I froze. Replace me? They wanted to replace me? The horror surged back in a flood of nausea. The cat. The thing, I could still feel it, the cold wetness of it, the shriek ringing in my ears. I snapped. The laugh bubbled out of me, manic, wild. Replace me? I yelled, my voice rising. Yeah, replace me. I'm done. I'm finished. I won't be coming back. The laughter was bubbling up like a broken dam, spilling from my mouth in a cracked, deranged sound. Their eyes were wide now, but they didn't understand. They couldn't understand. I leaned forward, my eyes wild. You got a cat? I shouted, pointing at them, my words slurring into madness. She's some cat, you? I cackled. It wasn't a laugh. It was a howl, a cry of madness, of terror, of freedom. They didn't get it. They didn't see it. She's some cat, I shouted louder and louder, the sound echoing in the sterile room. You got a cat. You don't know what's in there, but I do. Later I felt much better and I made a full recovery. I went home and thought about how I might enjoy a job as a trash collector or a pool boy, or perhaps as a bartender. I don't think I'll ever write anything ever again though, and that might be the worst of it. I just don't know if I'll ever be able to go back to doing what I loved. I don't think about the killer's shadow anymore. I'm well cured of all that goronography and nightmare fuel. In fact, I doubt I'll ever write again. Ready for more nightmares? Here comes the second story. Something strange happened at the motel I just owned. It was one of those nights when I stood behind the receptionist desk at the motel I had just bought. I purchased it from an old man who claimed he was selling it because he wanted to retire and spend his remaining years at home in peace. The motel was located in a remote stretch of the Nevada desert. When you looked around, all you'd see were cracked earth and scrubland. No other buildings for miles in either direction. There weren't even many trees out there. You might think I was crazy for buying a motel at the end of Route 66, surrounded by nothingness. Who'd stay here, right? You're wrong. So wrong. I had stayed at this motel several times before the owner decided to sell it to me. At first glance, it might seem like no one stayed here, especially during the day. But at night, cars, buses, and trucks would pass by. Drivers needed rest, or at least a place to stop for food or drink. With no other establishments around for miles, this motel was their only option. It was a good business. It ran as smoothly as I'd hoped. Until 6 weeks later. A young woman, probably in her 20s, walked into the motel. She looked lost and disoriented. She didn't carry any baggage, and judging by her appearance, she seemed to have been walking for miles before stumbling upon the place. Are you okay, miss? I asked, genuinely concerned. I don't know. I'm not sure, she replied. I honestly didn't know how to respond to that. Is there a room available? She asked. As a matter of fact, yes. I have plenty. Can I have one at the back? Your wish is my command, I said as I handed her the key. Hours later, a woman dressed in a gray pantsuit and wearing a wide-brimmed hat that nearly covered her eyes entered the motel. She looked like a government agent, or maybe a corporate auditor. Can I have one room at the back? She asked in a deep, heavy voice. Sure, I replied, handing her a key. Something about her felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. I brushed it off and went back to my desk. I was dozing off when a loud, agonized scream jolted me awake. It came from the back of the motel where the young woman was staying. Miss, are you okay? I shouted as I knocked on her door. No response. I knocked again. Miss? Still no response. The scream I'd heard earlier had been blood-curdling. I couldn't ignore it. Grabbing a spare key, I unlocked her door and stepped inside. The room was empty. It looked as though no one had ever been there. My mind raced. Then I remembered, all the guests that night had been regulars, except for the lost young woman and the woman in the gray suit. I ran to her room and knocked. No answer. Using my spare key again, I unlocked the door. Empty. As if no one had ever been there. After searching the entire motel and finding nothing, I had no choice but to let it go. For the next few weeks, everything returned to normal. Most of the guests were regulars with a few new ones, usually truck drivers or travelers passing through. No sign of the lost woman. No sign of the woman in the suit. Then one night, the door to the motel opened and a young lady walked in. She looked eerily similar to the first lost woman, not in appearance but in her demeanor. She too seemed lost and disoriented. I had a bad feeling. Less than an hour after she went to her room, another guest entered. An elderly man with white hair, dressed in a gray suit. Two different sets of people, somehow eerily alike with their unsettling similarities. I handed the elderly man in a gray suit a key to one of the rooms at the back, silently hoping the night would pass without incident. But I was wrong. An hour later, I heard another scream. A woman's scream, loud and filled with pain, coming from the back. Just like before, I rushed to the young woman's room and unlocked it with my spare key. Empty. I hurried to the elderly man's room and opened it. Empty. I had no idea what the hell had happened. Had this happened before I bought the motel from the previous owner? I didn't like disturbing an old man who was enjoying his rest at night, but this could affect the business. If he knew something about it, he had some explaining to do. "Oh, Mr. Holloway," the old man who previously owned the motel muttered, "I haven't told you about it?" "Nope," I replied. "Well, this happened several times before. More than I could count," he started, "but our regular customers had gotten used to it. Apart from the screaming and the two guests going missing, nothing else ever happened." "Well, it's true," I said. "But what happened though?" "The motel, young man," he explained, "is located at the center of two worlds, the world of the living and the world of the dead." I was stunned. "Is that supposed to be a joke?" "No, it's not," he said firmly. "And how does this explain the strange occurrences? The people you see entering the motel, those who seem lost and disoriented, they're lost souls. Ghosts if you prefer. They've run away from the afterlife, trying to find a way back to the world of the living," Mr. Holloway explained. "There's no way of getting back to life once you're dead, of course," he continued. "But the motel is like half-spiritual world, located at the very center of both worlds. These wandering souls don't realize they're dead. They see a motel and they enter looking for a place to rest." "And the people in suits? The screaming?" I asked impatiently. "The people in suits," he continued, "are reapers." "Reapers? Plural?" "Yes, reapers. You didn't think there was just one, did you? There are many. They come here to find the runaway souls and drag them back to the afterlife." "So, the screams I heard," I murmured. "It's the scream of the runaway souls being dragged back by force to the afterlife." "Okay, Mr. Holloway," I said, exasperated. "From what I understand, this thing happens on its own. There's nothing we can do about it." "Very true. But the screams, Mr. Holloway, they were loud and painful. Everyone at the motel could hear them. I could lose customers." "Nah. The motel's regular customers are already used to it," Mr. Holloway brushed off my concern. "Apart from the screams, nothing else happens, right? And it's just one scream per night, so..." This old man started to sound like he took things way too lightly. "Yeah, he got used to it, I get it. But what about new customers, Mr. Holloway?" "I get plenty of new customers too," I asked, worried. "You have two things to try," he explained. "First, inform the new customers when they arrive at the motel to ignore any screams they hear. The motel is located in a deserted area. It's not uncommon for weird things to happen." "I'm not sure I like the first option, but carry on," I said. "Second," he proceeded, "when the lost, wandering souls ask for a room, give them a room at the front, not at the back. The closest to the lobby." I frowned. "Why? Wouldn't it just make things worse? More customers would hear the screams. Have you ever seen the runaway souls entering the motel from the back?" "No." "It's because half of the motel that stands on the spiritual world is the east side, not the west. You heard the screams because the souls were dragged from the living world at the west side of the motel to the dead world at the east. Putting the runaway souls in the east rooms," Mr. Holloway concluded, "would prevent their screaming from being heard when they're dragged back to the afterlife by reapers. Because the afterlife is at the east." Now that was relieving. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling stories. And hit the bell icon to never miss an update.